Hello, this is Mark from CQ Simple. I would like to show you today how to take a system out of the box and get it up and running as fast as possible. I'm not going to show you all of the specific advanced changes you might have to make, but give me the nuts and the bolts of how do I take a system and get calls going in and going out of my platform as fast as possible. So the first thing is you open your box, you got your Nimbus Platform. You want to plug it into your network or plug it in directly to your computer. The Nimbus 100 has a single Ethernet port, so you don't have to worry about that. The Nimbus 40, however, has two Ethernet ports. You should use the Ethernet port that is closer to the blue audio port. Once you have it plugged in, you should navigate to the default IP of the Nimbus 192.168.1.245. Every Nimbus that ships will have that default IP address. We'll get into changing that to meet your customer's IP scheme here in a second. If your local network is not on that scheme, how do you go about allowing your computer to access that default IP address? In that case, you want to come down here to your Ethernet area, right click, select Open Network and Sharing Center, then select Change Adapter Setting, find your Ethernet, which you have plugged into your network or plugged directly into the Nimbus, scroll to Properties, then choose Internet Protocol version 4, select Properties. At that point, instead of getting your IP address from your DHCP server, select Use the following IP address and get yourself on that scheme, and you can set yourself up as 1.100. The Nimbus is going to be at 245. If you want to put in a default gateway, you can. You don't have to in order to be able to find the network, in order to find the Nimbus. In this case, we've now changed our network. We didn't necessarily need to in my case, but that is how you would change that in your case to get to the Nimbus platform. This is the landing page. So if you're seeing this, it means you've done something right. You've changed your network correctly or changed your computer's network correctly. The first thing you want to do is register your platform. To register your platform, you're going to need the deployment ID or the serial number of your platform. That can be found under Server Info, under System Serial Number. This can also be found on the side of your Nimbus platform. Once you have that number, you can copy and paste it, or copy it, I suppose. Then click on Register System. This is part one of obtaining your lifetime warranty. So simply put in your dealer information, your serial number gets placed here. Once you've finished the registration, hit Submit. It will give you a message indicating that you successfully registered it. At that point, as soon as you plug it into a UPS, your lifetime warranty is established. Once you have done that, and you are anxious to program the Nimbus Voice, hopefully you're programming this in your office, prior to the customer's location. We always recommend that. And if you would like help in how to set that up with the switch and so on, we'd be more than happy to talk you through that. In that case, you'd go to Nimbus Voice. I'll just go back to the landing page. Nimbus Voice, and then Nimbus Voice Programming. It's going to take you to this page where you will then click Nimbus Voice Admin. Upon clicking the Nimbus Voice Admin, you're going to be greeted with a username and a password to access the Nimbus platform. And in this case, the default is admin and then CQ Simple with the first three letters capitalized. And now you're in Nimbus Voice. The first place I'm going to go to in Nimbus Voice is under Admin, System Admin, every single time. First I'm going to go to DNS. So on the right hand side here you can see we've got lots of options. We're not going to hit every single one right now. I'm just going to hit the ones that are necessary to get your platform up and running. So DNS. As you can see, it indicates you should set your first DNS as basically a loopback, 127.0.0.1. At that point, the DNSs are up to you. Maybe you want to use your local ISP's DNSs. Maybe you want to use Google's DNSs or Yahoo's. That is completely up to you. Once you've placed in your DNSs, lower right hand corner, press submit. Now I'm going to go to email setup. If your customer is not going to be utilizing voicemail to email, you don't necessarily have to worry about this. But I think it's always wise to set it up, especially for system emails, alerts for memory and so on. So I always personally like to set up the email. In this case, for most of our customers and your customers, you're probably going to be working with an external SMTP server. Whether it's Gmail, that's always the easiest, I think, to set up. So I typically go to Gmail, I make an account for the business with a username and a password, and I click submit. So let's just say Vogel4949, okay, and a password, and that password I know because I registered my email system. I registered that Gmail account, so it's mvogel4949@gmail.com. If you want to use Office 365, you can use that with that username and password. If you want to use a different SMTP server, you certainly can do that. Maybe your customer has one that they're using, that they're working with. In that case, you can use authentication, meaning that it does have a password, username and a password. No authentication. These are if you're utilizing like maybe an A2 hosting for your email. You can go to them and say, hey, I want to set up an email account for my voicemail. I don't want a username and a password. It might be called voicemail@midlandnazarene.com. So that would be an example of a customer using, an outside SMTP server. Once you've got that set up, simply hit submit, and now your system is going to be able to send emails to users with voicemails to email. After email, I'm going to go to intrusion detection. In this case, this is one of the security features of the platform. One thing I like to do, whitelist, these are the IP addresses that you don't want the system to ban. I always like to put the local area scheme on there. I don't want anything locally to be banned. For example, if a phone gets the wrong password, it keeps trying to register. After a certain number of times, the system will actually ban that IP address. And that's kind of a problem when you're registering a system. So under the whitelist, you can type that in if you'd like, if that's your local scheme. You also can type it in like that for your local scheme. If you are going to be accessing this system remotely, you want to do some work from your home office or your business office on the system, it's not a bad idea to put your WAN IP in there if you're coming from a static WAN IP from your business. That way you know that you're personally not going to get blacklisted from the platform. Once you've set that up, we're going to hit submit. Save that settings. At this point, we're going to go to network settings, next on the list. This is the place where you will change the IP address of your platform. If you're going to a customer site that's not using a 192.168.1 framework, you simply put in the static IP you want, along with the right gateway, which is the router that your system is going to be using. Do not change this static, and do not change this from yes. So these should always be static and yes on your platform. Once you've changed this, obviously your system will vanish from where you were before because now you're at a new static IP. In this case, I'm going to leave it where it is. But if you do change it, you would hit Save Interface. And it was going to take a little while, and then all of a sudden your screen's going to go blank, and you would need to re-navigate to the new static IP you chose. Then click on Hostname. In this case, a host name is useful for voicemail to email, so voicemails don't get bounced or emails don't get bounced. In this case, we'll just call it Nimbus Demo. If you've got a business, Merle's Water, you can call it Merle's Water. Bob Schmidt, I believe, is working with that one. just something that allows you to understand and realize what company you're working with, where this Nimbus is sitting. That would be the change you would make right there. After that, let's update that host name. You're going to go to time zone. So as you can see, we're not hitting everything right now. We are Eastern time zone, so I'm not going to change that. If you look closely when you're registering the system, you will be able to see the actual time right there. But let's just say you do need to change it to Chicago. If you're Central Time, you can obviously sort through the list, find your time zone, submit this. Typically, the system will need to be rebooted when you have changed your time zone. Let me show you where that reboot is. It's under Power Options. This is the safest way to reboot your system without just flashing power on and off. You can either power it off safely from here or reboot it safely from here. Clicking the reboot button, it's going to ask you to actually type in reboot to do that. In this case, I'll pass on that, but if you are changing your time zone, that typically is necessary. At this point, I'm going to go to Settings, *SIP Settings. And I'm going to put in my WAN IP. I also am going to put in my local IP. So 192.168.1/24. If I know my WAN IP, I'm going to put that here. You can hit Detect Network Settings. If you are connected to the internet, it will be able to go to the router, find your WAN IP. But if you're setting this up not being connected to the internet or the router you're going to be using, you will need to type in that WAN IP on your own. We'll just put it in right here, 97.87.30.82. At this point, I also like to click on CHAN SIP Settings, scroll down, allow SIP guests, I change to no. That increases the security of your system. I'm going to submit this. Now, that wasn't an actual external address here. Let me type that in here. 2.168.10/24. Now we're seeing that here. I'm going to go to CHAN SIP, scroll down, change that to no, submit it again. So now I've saved both pages here. I navigated away from that page prior to saving it. You can see the Apply Configs button up here. What that button is, that's like, okay, you've made a lot of changes, Apply Configs is, now put all those changes into effect. You don't have to press that button every time you see it. You can make 10, 15, 20 changes and then go apply everything. In this case, I'll select it so you can see what happens. It's going to show you the reloading screen. Depending on how many changes are basically waiting in queue, the reloading screen can take anywhere from just a few seconds to 30 seconds. In this case, we've already accomplished that. Once I've set up my settings under *SIP Settings, I'm going to go back to Admin, and I'm going to go to User Management. User Management is what allows users to be able to access the system with the user control panel and make changes to just their extension, whether it's find me, follow me, or voicemail to email, or even their voicemail. It's very useful to allow your end users to make changes to just their extension. What you want to do first here is click on Settings. I'm going to select No. I don't necessarily like to have an email go out to every user telling me that they've made an extension for them, just because it doesn't really do them a lot of good. You can leave that at yes if you want. I'm then going to go to Groups, and I'm going to add a new group. I'm going to call this a user group. And in this case, I'm going to take a look at click on UCP. I'm just going to want to make sure my allow login is selected as yes. I'm going to want to look at my call history, selected as yes. All right, that's all set. I'm going to go back here to group user, and I'm going to hit submit. So I just basically made that group, and it's going to allow those people to be able to access the user control panel. At this point, I'm going to start making extensions. I'm going to go to Applications and Extensions to do this. The easiest way to make an extension is to under the Quick Create extension. This just basically asks you 3 or 4 questions and says, okay, boom, here's your extension. If you want to go to a more detailed version, you can click Add Extension and select Add CHAN SIP extension. That's pretty much every SIP device you're going to be using. If you want to make just a voicemail box for somebody, like you don't want them to actually have a phone, you would select Add Virtual Extension. But in this example, I'm going to use a Quick Create. So it says, okay, what number do you want to give them? I'll give them extension number 200. We're going to call them Tom. Do they have their own outbound caller ID? Right? Does this person have their own unique caller ID? In this case, I'm going to leave that blank. Most people don't. Email address. We'll say tom@cqsimple.com. Select Next. Do you want to make a user management? Yes, I do. And I want to use the user group that I made. Okay, that's going to allow that person to make changes to their extension. So leave it at yes, and then change this to the user group. Do you want to give them voicemail? Yes or no? And if you do, what PIN do you want to give them? And default on the system is to give it the same as the extension number. And you can change that if you want. Say, for example, you just want to have 4 zeros, whatever you want there. Select Finish. So I'm going to say, we'll just leave that. Okay. So here we have our Tom, extension 200. That was very fast. One thing you should note is in this process, if you want to go back and make changes to this extension, click on the pencil over here. That's your edit button. Okay. And here's everything about that extension. As you can see, scrolling across, there's a wide number of options. The one that you should change is under voicemail. When you set this voicemail up and you're doing voicemail to email, you should select email attachment as yes, meaning that when it sends an email out, it actually attaches the WAV file to that email. So that's one thing with the Quick Create extension, that even though you're giving it the voicemail to email, you should go in and tell it to connect it to that voicemail, actually attach that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my extension list. I'll show you another example. If instead of using the Quick Create, you can add an extension the long way. So add extension. So extension, we'll just call this 201. In this case, what user manager we want to select user. Right? So that's changing it to the group that we just created. Voicemail. I do want to give a voicemail. Let's give it the password 234. What's the address? So we'll call this one Sean@cqsimple.com, and we do want to attach it. I'm going to go back here to in general. I forgot to give it an extension name, so we'll call it Sean. So we're going to find me, follow me. We're going to leave that off for now. It's something you can go back and change later if you want to set that up for your customer. Okay. So now we have our extensions, 3 extensions. I'm going to apply the configs. Once again, I didn't have to do that along the way. I can wait a little bit to apply all of my changes. You would go through that process if you want to create more extensions. If you've got 5, 10, 15, 20 different extensions. At that point, I'm going to set up my SIP trunks. So under Connectivity, I'm going to click on Trunks. I'm going to click on Add Trunk and Add SIP Trunk. Now this will change if you're using PRI, and we can get to that at a later time. So you're going to want to give it a name. So let's just call it SIP Trunk. Outbound caller ID, if you want to put in their main number, you can. You don't have to. It will still work without it. In this case, you want to scroll to SIP Settings. Okay, and this is really what makes a SIP trunk work. You want to give it a name. So let's just say you happen to be using Appia trunks. We'll just call it Appia. You don't have to, the name is up to you. In this case, you've got peer details that you need to fill in. And then if you click on incoming, you've got user context, user details, and a register string. All of these will be dependent on the SIP trunk provider you use, so I can't specifically list what they are right now. On our web page, we have listed a wide variety of providers that we have tested and that we know exactly what to put in these boxes. ClarityTel, ESI, Appia, Momentum, Vitality, and a few others. NextVortex is one we're really happy with. So if you go to the website under the dealer manuals, it will tell you what to put in each of these boxes. If we don't have the template, if we've not tested those providers before, then we should definitely do some testing with your SIP trunk provider to know what details we should put in these boxes. Once you have completed this, select Submit, and now your SIP trunks are set up. And if it's a SIP trunk provider you've used before, this should be a very fast process, meaning copying and pasted from a previous installation. After this, I'm going to set up my inbound routes. Inbound routes are going to be all of the DIDs that people can call to get into your business or to get into your customer's business. I'm going to select Add Inbound Route, and I want to give it a description. So let's just call this the main incoming number. We'll just say main number. And this is the box that really matters. Okay, what is that DID number? What is that number that people are going to dial to access your customer? If you don't have a number in there, even if your SIP trunk provider is looking for it, if you don't create an inbound route for each DID, that number will not hit the system. So if you have 5 DIDs, you need to do this 5 times. 10 DIDs, do this 10 times, 1 for each number. Really at this point, put in your number, come down here to destination, and decide where you want it to go. So when someone calls this number, I want it to ring extension 1. And hit submit. So now if someone dials that number, extension 1 will ring. If my company has more than one DID, I need to repeat this procedure. So we'll call this, failover number. And then you would put in your different DID here. And in this case, if someone calls this DID, where do you want this to go? So in this case, we want it to go to a different extension. We go to Sean. And you can have it go anywhere you want. Auto attendance, call groups, ring groups, extensions, recordings. Repeat that procedure for every DID your customer has. Next, I'm going to create an outbound route. So this is going to be if the customer wants to dial out, what's going to happen? Select Add Outbound Route. Give it a name. So we'll say main outbound. Right. What is their business, what's their phone number that they want pulsed out? That's going to be your route CID. At this point, this is really important. Under trunk sequence, you do need to match this up to a trunk that you have made. If you do not select the SIP trunk that you made, no calls will go out. So in this case, I connected it to the SIP trunk I created. The second important step is to click on Dial Patterns. Dial Patterns is what the phone will be looking for to know to use this outbound route. And you can click on Dial Patterns Wizards to help you out here. So if you're using 7 digits, 10 digits, 11 digits, emergency, do you want them to use toll-free? Do you want them to use international? You can click on these and the system will generate those dial patterns for you. So I'm going to click on to just give you an idea of what to expect here. So I'm going to tell it to generate the routes. All right, so what this happens here is, so if someone dials 7 digits, prefix is what you want to attach to it. So in this case, you would attach to it a 1 and then the area code. So if someone dials 7 digits, meaning that they think they're going to dial locally, you would do 1 and then the area code. Obviously 989 would be different for your area code. If they dial 10 digits, you would attach a 1 to it. Now some of this will change based on your SIP trunk provider. If your SIP trunk provider is only looking for 10 digits, they don't want the 1, then you actually wouldn't want to attach it here or here. So it's important to ask your SIP trunk provider, when I send a number to you, do you want 10 or 11 digits? In this case, I'll act like they want 11. Or if a customer dials all 11, it will go out. 800 numbers are now allowed. 911 is now allowed. 011 dot means any international calls is allowed. I would not include that personally. That's not something I like to include if they don't have to have it. Even if they do have to have it, I'll actually attach a password to the route. So now, once you put this in here, now the system will actually look at the phone number dialed and know to use this outbound route, which uses that SIP trunk we made. If you don't do two things here, let me click on the edit button. If you don't attach a SIP trunk and you don't have the dial patterns, calls will not go out. So you need to do both. If you want this to have a password, you can select that here. That would be if you do want to have a password for an international call. So I'm going to submit that. I'm going to apply my configs. So at this point, I've set up my system, I've made my extensions, I've set up my SIP trunks, I've set up my inbound routes, I've set up my outbound route. I do see a fair number of people actually make an emergency route. And so they know if there happens to be a caller ID specifically for this, they're going to put the emergency caller ID here. What does 911 expect to see from your business, and then click emergency. And then you would still need to attach this to your SIP trunk and hit submit. At this point, once I've made my outbound routes, I've made my trunks, I've made my extensions, I've made my inbound routes, I want to program some phones. That will be kind of my last step here. And once you've programmed your phones, you can make calls, you can call each other, you can receive phone calls. At that point, it's just trying to figure out the details of how they want their calls to flow in. So, to get your calls provisioned, I'm going to assume two things. Number one, you have Endpoint Manager, and number two, you're working with a router that has Option 66. Option 66 allows your router to tell your phones, hey, go talk to the Nimbus has your files, and you should look like this. So it's a very helpful procedure. So what you're going to want to do is go to Settings, Endpoint Manager. As you can see, another feature, this little tab is a new version 13 feature. Here's all of our options for Endpoint Manager. First thing you want to click on is Global Settings. In Global Settings, you should input, what is the local address of the Nimbus. And if you're going to move it to a new location, you wouldn't use the default IP, but in this case, that's where it's sitting right now. What's the external IP? One thing to note here is when you program a phone with Endpoint Manager, it changes the phone's GUI password from admin to 222.222. So if you want to change that, if you don't want it to be 6 2s, you can change that here. Actually, typically set extension mapping IP address to yes also. So I'm going to save those global changes. At this point, I'm going to click on my tab, and I am going to select what brand of phone I want to program. So as you can see, we have a wide variety of phones that the Nimbus platform will provision to meet your customers' needs. The CQ400 phone, that is not found on Endpoint Manager. You don't necessarily need to buy the module in order to program the phone. But in this case, I'm going to work through programming a Grandstream phone. A lot of our dealers are using the Grandstream. Lately I've been preferring Yealink, but that's another story. So select the model that you're going to use. So in this case, we're going to use a Grandstream model. And we are going to create a template, meaning we want all of our Grandstream phones to look like this. So we'll call it GrandStream. We'll call it GrandStream 1. You can change this from internal to external simply by clicking the buttons here. So if this phone is going to be local, select internal. If it's going to be a remote phone, select external. Select your time zone. Change that if you're not Eastern Standard Time. Line label, extension, name, extension. Scroll down. Be sure TFTP is enabled here or selected, and hit apply. Once you hit apply, it's going to show all of the GrandStream phones that you can provision. I happen to have a 2140 plugged in, so I'm going to select that. Up will pop the screen showing me what buttons I can program on a GrandStream 2140. I've got basically 6 keys, or 6 buttons that I can program. So I'll make a line key, I'll make a call park. In this case for the Nimbus, call park is value 70. And then I'll make 2 BLF keys for parking lot number 1, which happens to be extension 71, and parking lot 2, which happens to be parking lot 7 or extension 72. And I'm going to save that model. Okay, so now you can see it's still selected. If I were to click on it, you would see that I still have my button programming. This is what I want my phones to look like when I provision them. And this is up to you and your customer. I'll click Save Model again. Then I'm going to go down here. In this drop-down menu, I'm going to click it and select the second option, Save and Rebuild Configs, and hit Apply. At this point, I'm going to select my tab for Endpoint Manager. So you can see we're back in our Endpoint Manager options, and I'm going to select Network Scan. As you can see, we've got a phone right away. This is a GrandStream phone that's plugged in. It's not provisioned. And if you were programming a system in your office, I would take a switch, I would plug in 8, 15, 20 phones, and they're all going to show up here. And select what extension you want this to be. Right? We'll make this phone Tom. Don't change the brand. Do not change the MAC address. What template do you want to use? GrandStream. What model is it? 2140. Hit save. And if you have option 66 at this point, all you need to do is go to the phone and reboot it. When you saved it, you made those files for that MAC address. When that MAC address reboots, it's going to go talk to the router and say, okay, here's your IP address, and go to the Nimbus, the local IP address, and get your files. So the phone actually typically reboots twice. That's one thing to notice when you're working with the Endpoint Manager and phones rebooting. It's a good sign. And at that point, GrandStreams are a little slow to reboot. Within probably 3 to 4 minutes, that phone is going to look exactly like we told it to look, with a line key, a call park, and then a lot 1 and a lot 2. At that point, you would basically do that for the rest of your extensions. Plug them into your PoE switch, tell it what extension to be, and reboot it. At that point, you've got calls coming in, you've got calls going out. Calls can be made between extensions, and it's just kind of defining what your customer wants when a call comes into the system. I hope you find this useful. Certainly if you have more questions or you've got more in-depth questions, this was not meant to cover every single topic that the Nimbus can do. If you do have those questions, do not hesitate to reach out. We would love to help out. Support at cqsimple.com or phone number 855-344-2774. Appreciate you watching this, and I hope you have a great day.